Hello friends, welcome to my channel. We were studying photosynthesis. In that we were learning light reaction. So in the light reaction in the last class we have seen part 1. Now we are going to do part 2. Now let us see. In the last class we have discussed what is a pigment. A pigment is any chemical compound that absorbs sunlight at fixed wavelength and as due to this and it excites an electron gets excited and electron releases energy when it comes back to its ground state. Okay, so for example this is a pigment which is a chemical compound, and this, when sunlight falls on this pigment, this is sunlight, when sunlight falls on this pigment it will absorb the light energy at fixed wavelength. For example, if it can absorb light energy at 400 nanometer, it will absorb light at 400 nanometer. As a result, an electron will get excited in this pigment. Electron gets excited, and when this electron comes back, it releases energy. Okay, so when this electron comes back, it releases energy, and this energy, it can be used for many purposes. This energy can either be used, can go in the form of heat or light. These two things we need not study. Or this energy is given to another pigment. This electron is given to another pigment, and hence the energy is transferred to another pigment. So whenever light falls on a pigment, it absorbs energy at fixed wavelength and it excites an electron. This electron comes back at a ground state and it releases the absorbed energy. This energy, it is used either in the form of heat or light, or this energy is given to another pigment. Chemical pigment, this energy it is given to another chemical pigment which has enzymes. This pigment has enzymes, and this pigment, it can carry out photochemical reaction like photolysis. It has enzymes, so it can carry out photolysis. So four things can happen. Whenever a pigment, it absorbs light at fixed wavelength, it excites an electron and energy is released from the electron. This released energy, it can be used either in the form of heat or light, or the third one is this energy, it is given to another pigment. This electron is given to another pigment, so energy is transferred to another pigment. And or the fourth one is this energy is given to a pigment which has enzymes in it, and this pigment, it can carry out photolysis, that is breaking of water. So let us study. We don't have to study the first two parts, that is energy used in the form of heat and light. We have to study on the third part, that is when the energy is given to, when the electron it is given to another pigment. For example, this is a pigment which can absorb energy at 500 nanometer. This is another pigment which can absorb energy at 480 nanometer, and this is third pigment which can absorb energy at 540 nanometer. Light is falling on the pigments, on all the pigments, and the wavelength of light is 500 nanometer. If this pigment absorbs light at 500 nanometer, it will be absorbed by which pigment? This pigment. And then it gets transferred to a pigment which is having higher wavelength. Why? Because energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. Energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. Whenever energy decreases, wavelength increases. When energy falls on a pigment, it excites an electron, and when the electron comes to the ground state, some energy is released. The energy released is always less because some energy is lost in the excitement of electron. Whenever an electron is excited, some energy gets lost because of the excitement of electron, and then when the electron comes to the ground state, some energy is released. this released energy is always less than the energy absorbed. So energy is transferred to another pigment which has more wavelength, because energy is inversely proportional to wavelength. Whenever energy decreases, now less amount of energy is getting transferred. Hence wavelength of the pigment increases. Hope you understood. Light energy is falling on a pigment, and this is a pigment which absorbs light energy at 410 nanometer wavelength. So when light energy is falling, it will absorb the light energy. This pigment will absorb light energy at the fixed wavelength, that is 410 nanometer. And this energy, the electron will get excited, and some energy will be lost when the electron comes back to ground state, because some energy is lost in the excitement of electron, and this electron, it is transferred to another pigment which is having higher wavelength, and energy is transferred to another pigment which is having higher wavelength, that is 440 nanometer. It can absorb light at higher wavelength. Now this energy getting transferred to another wavelength which is having higher wavelength of 470 nanometer. From here the energy gets transferred to a pigment which can absorb light at 500 nanometer. From here we can see that the wavelength increases, and when the wavelength is increasing, energy will decrease, because energy, it is inversely proportional to wavelength. Here we can see again the energy is getting transferred to another pigment which is having 540 nanometer. Then again it is getting transferred to 600 nanometer. Then this energy will get transferred to 610 nanometer pigment. It will get transferred from here. It is getting transferred to 580 nanometer. From here 680, and then from here 610 nanometer, and then from here energy gets transferred here, and the energy then gets transferred to the main pigment which is called the reaction center. The main pigment is called the reaction center, and it is chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A is the main pigment which is the reaction center, and this all pigments are chlorophyll B, carotenoid and xanthophyll. So the main pigment is chlorophyll A, which is called the reaction center. This main pigment, it has enzymes attached to it, so it can carry out photolysis of water. Photolysis is breaking of water. This main pigment, it has enzymes attached to it, so it can carry out photolysis of water. Other pigments has no enzymes, so it cannot carry out photolysis. So what is happening here? First of all, light is falling. When light energy is falling, it is absorbed by a pigment at 410 nanometer. This pigment can absorb light energy at fixed wavelength, which is 410 nanometer. From here, the electron gets excited, it comes back and it gets transferred to another pigment at higher wavelength. Now, energy is getting decreased, because whenever a pigment excites electron, the energy released is always less than the energy absorbed. So, it gets transferred to another pigment which has more wavelength. So, energy again decreases. Finally, the energy is passing on to different pigments at higher and higher increasing wavelength, and this chlorophyll A, which is the main reaction center, it has the wavelength of 680 nanometer, which is the highest wavelength. Chlorophyll A, or the reaction center, it functions at higher wavelength and lowest energy. So this is called the reaction center, chlorophyll A. It has enzymes attached to it, and these enzymes, they carry out photolysis or breaking of water. Electron reaches here in the chlorophyll A, which is called the reaction center, and it is the main pigment. Now this all together, these all pigments together, it consists of chlorophyll B, carotenoid and xanthophyll, and they are called as the antenna. And this complete system is called as photosystem. This complete system, it is known as photosystem. It is known as photosystem. This antenna, it is otherwise called as LHC. LHC is known as light harvesting complex. This antenna is otherwise, it is called as light harvesting. It is known as light harvesting complex in this photosystem, and these pigments, they are bind to the membrane through some protein. So the antennae, they channel their energy they funnel their energy to the reaction center. Antennae, the whole antennae, they funnel their energy to the main reaction center.